Entering the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience. I didn't want to leave you too long without any challenge content. So today we are talking about the challenge, maybe the ChallengeMania Hall of Fame, inducting some of the all-time greatest cast members. Breaking this down with me, the man who is responsible for, at least partially responsible for creating the ChallengeMania Hall of Fame, the co-host of the ChallengeMania podcast, Scott Yager, is on the line. My man, why was this something that you wanted to do right now? Was there a demand for it where you're like, hey, everywhere has a Hall of Fame. We need a Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So, okay. So a couple things. So one, as far as it having a Hall of Fame, obviously all the major sports have a Hall of Fame, and those are widely considered to be legit Hall of Fames. And then in the world of wrestling, there's the WWE Hall of Fame, which of course exists, and they kind of decide who's going to be in that depending on a bunch of different factors. But I modeled our Hall of Fame and kind of modeled our awards more after Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer Awards and Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, in the sense that it's going to be voted on by the people, the viewers, the fans, are patrons of the show. But also just the idea that a lot of thought would be put into it. And the conversation is almost more fun than the actual induction. So with this, as far as the timing of it, this is just a little bit of savvy as far as like, look, we have 2 challenges a year. When those are on, people want to hear about those. When those are not on, it's fun to have some things to get the juices flowing and people talking. So what we did was, in the winter, in between seasons 32 and 33, we did our ChallengeMania Awards, where we did just pretty much the year that was, and gave out awards for Elimination of the Year and Challenger of the Year and Best Commentary, stuff like that. And now that we're in the summer and we're in between seasons 33 and 34 here, I thought it'd be a great time to put together some summer content and have that be the ChallengeMania Hall of Fame. So the Hall of Fame is more talking about the challengers of yesteryear. We did decide to implement a rule where no one who has competed on the last 6 seasons of the show is eligible. As you know, the major sports, they have an eligibility thing where, if you have, it's 5 years from your retirement that you become eligible for, say, the NBA Hall of Fame, or the Basketball Hall of Fame, I should say. We didn't want to do 5 years, so what we did was 3 years. And since there's roughly 2 challenges a year, that's pretty much going to always be 6 seasons. So right now, the cutoff season is Rivals 3. So before you hear this list and you think, oh, where's Sarah Rice? She played on Rivals 3. Oh, if you say, oh, where's Derek Kaczynski? He played on Dirty 30. Where's Johnny Bananas? He's still playing and will probably play until the day that we all die. So we wanted to kind of have there be a little bit of separation. Granted, everyone on this list, because it's reality TV and because all these people are still in great shape, could always appear on a future show. So if someone gets inducted and then plays again, we're not going to take their ChallengeMania Hall of Fame status away from them. But, we are going to try to keep it that 6-season cutoff. So if any of these people don't get in, say, and they do play on, say, season 35, they'd have to go back to the end of the line. So I think that's a fun way to keep some of the players who are playing to this day out of it for a little bit, delay those conversations, and to be able to kind of, go back in time and shine a light on some of the stars of the first few seasons of the challenge, the first 20 years of the challenge, where the challenge was a little different. The competitions were a little different, but we really do want to make sure that I keep using the example. If you're walking through a fictitious museum that is the ChallengeMania Hall of Fame and you see the buffs and the statues and whatnot, that hopefully the people that we all remember from those earlier seasons are in there. If not this year, then maybe next year or the year after.
So what I want to do for the people watching this show, although your vote will not count unless you're a Patreon member for ChallengeMania, if you want to get into a draw,
which you can still become.
Yeah, you can definitely go do that right now and go vote. But if you want to get into a draw for $20 DK, smash the like button for this episode, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and buy the rules that Scott laid out. So from anyone from Rivals 3 and on is ineligible for this. Who are the 2 male cast members and female cast members that you would put into the Challenge Hall of Fame? Because I want to go through the nominees here, and I really only have one issue with one of the nominees, and maybe there is no good answer. So let's start with the female side of things. Dean Brown was just put in the Hall of Fame. She is the first cast member in. She is not up for voting. She is solidified in. But the way that it works for you is that there's 5 nominees, you get to vote for 1, but the top 2 will be put in. So from the female side, it's Evelyn, Coral, Rachel, Susie, and Paula. Is Paula only on this list because she was just on your show?
No. So, okay, I'll lay it out for you. So, again, I put a lot of thought into this. I looked at a lot of the numbers. Paula's done 9 seasons. She won 2 championships. one of which she shares with, when you look at who might have been in that fifth slot over her, a lot of people keep saying Emily Schramm. Emily Schramm played 3 seasons, and the championship she won along with Paula. Was Paula fresher in my mind because we had just spoken to her? It's possible, but I looked at the Katie Cooleys and the Ruthies of the world, and I looked at some of the other Trishells, and I looked at some of the other names that people keep throwing at us. Paula Walnuts is sort of, and I'll give you another example, is like an Anissa who is not eligible because she's has played recently.
And probably shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
Well, so the thing is so Paula Walnuts, to me, when you look at that middle era of the challenge, so post your Rachels and your Corals, but pre your Cara Marias, your Ashley Mitchells, the kind of new wave we're in now. Paula's in that sweet spot. To me, Paula is and granted, she played on the same she appeared on the same Real World season as Johnny Bananas. So their career parallels are very similar. Paula decides to leave the challenge and begin having a family life. She's, as she mentioned on our podcast, has been pregnant for the last 5 years. But if you look at the numbers between her and Johnny Bananas won 6 championships, but when you look at his percentages, he's lost a lot of eliminations, very similar percentage to Paula. And he's played in so many seasons where if you break it down, Paula played in 9, ends up winning 2 championships, made a few other finals. Johnny Bananas also has just almost maybe just kind of gotten more chances that has given him all those championships where he'd obviously one day be a shoo-in. But Paula, to me, is kind of the lock from that generation where when you think of the challenge from 2006, 2007 to 2012, she was a mainstay and she played on almost every season and she did well. It's one of those things where you talk about an Anissa, to me, it's the 2 championships for Paula that separate her. I'm interested to hear who you would put in over her, and I can maybe, do some better counterpointing there. But Paula's gotten a lot of love. When you look at the comment threads, both on my Instagram or my Twitter or our Facebook, or even over at patreon.com/ChallengeMania, where you can still become a Maniac level patron and vote. You have another week to do so. The voting's been going on for a week. We're having it go on for 2 to give you guys a chance to sign up if you want, and also to let people have the proper time to make these decisions. It's a tough decision picking 1 and 1. Although 2 from each side will get in, you're only voting for 1. Me, Derek, we only get 1 vote too, so we don't have more of a say here than any of you, based after the fact that we did put together the ballot. But a lot of people saying Paula. I'll put it to you this way: out of the 5 on the ballot, Paula is not the person that the most people have had a problem with. / she is not the person who's gotten the least love in the comments. So it's interesting you go with her.
It's funny. I would guess that Susie probably has the least amount of love just because how few challenges she actually ended up appearing on. But it's not just performance-based as it comes down to this. So that's almost the way that, I guess, when it comes to Hall of Fame, you can interpret it any way you want. I don't think that Paula's undeserving by any means. I love Paula. Paula's great. The one that I would have thrown in here in her spot, because it seems like you have Evelyn, Coral, Rachel, Susie, all from sort of when Paula comes in, all these women are just kind of finishing up what they're up to. Evelyn's kind of working on with both sides here. She was just so dominant, and probably, besides Emily Schramm, maybe that the most dominant female challenger of all time.
Played in 3 seasons though. Like, to me,
she's so good though.
I love Emily. And I get that if you were asking a person who would you not want to go up against, maybe it would be Emily. But the thing that we have working against us with this is that, ideally in a perfect world, ChallengeMania would have existed after 10, 15, 20 seasons of the challenge, and we'd be, all these seasons deep now. And we would be able to induct Emily Schramm, like the first year she's eligible, but she'd be competing for a spot with other people who are in a similar era as her. To me, I don't like the idea of having like an Emily Schramm whose like entire case is, man, this girl is a badass, but she only played in 3 seasons, won 1 championship, against a Coral or against a Rachel. Like, to me, this first ballot should be filled with people who have the championships, have the seasons, have the history, have the wins, were great characters, etc. And the one I felt the least bad about leaving off was Emily Schramm, because she'll have her time, and for sure. And when I looked at it, I was just like, I know that depending on where your value system lies, like if you vote based on who was the best, that's fine, and you can vote that way. But I didn't want it to be so much of a discrepancy there where you're literally, and Alton's pretty close too, because Alton is on this ballot. But he only played in 4 seasons. He only won 1. And a lot of the votes Alton's going to get are that Alton is sort of the what could have been factor of like when I watched him, he seemed so damn good. When we saw him in New York in January, the guy still looks like $1 million. We had him on the podcast recently. He has a background in rock climbing and skateboarding. Coolest, nicest guy in the world. He'll be at our show tomorrow at the Hollywood Improv in Los Angeles. If you want to check that out, ChallengeMania.LA for tickets. But so Alton is sort of the male equivalent. But to me, there was just a little bit more of a separation with Alton, a little bit more of a lasting impact with him to have that 5th guy spot. Whereas with Emily, she would be taking a spot from Paula. And to me, I thought that when you also stack up the fact that that win that Emily had was with Paula, it's like we're doing these in not officially in an order, but this is the first Challenge Mania Hall of Fame induction. Who belongs on that first ballot more? Paula, who played earlier, longer, on more seasons and won a championship with Emily, or Emily, who ends up kind of being a blip on the challenge radar, albeit an awesome one, but has that one championship with Paula? Like, to me, she's 1 or 2 ballots down the line for me.
So I can get behind the leaving Emily off in favor of Paula. I'm all for that. That actually wasn't who I was going to bring up. It almost goes more towards, like, Alton has so few challenges, but for a while he really did seem like he was the face of the challenge. He was one of the most popular characters. If I was going to go longevity, and I mean, Paula's a better competitor than this person, but if we're going to throw Coral on this list, I mean, Coral's best season was Fresh Meat, and she had to go home along with Evan, where, you know, she wasn't always the best competitor, but she was such a force on the challenge that gets her on this list. I would wager that Tanya may need to be on here.
Interesting. So, you know, it's funny you mentioned Coral. Coral's probably the most polarizing person on this ballot because, you know, myself, I've gone on record as saying I'm probably going, I don't even know if I've done it at this point, but I'm probably going to vote for Coral because I do think that you can't have a Challenge Mania Hall of Fame without Coral. And I think the longer she's on the ballot and the more people she has to be stacked up against and whatnot, it probably lessens her chances. Whereas, like, I think right off the bat here, it's like, you know, if I, you know, her and Rachel as well, but to me, she should be in. I know that if you're comparing just numbers, just would I want to go against this person? Sure. Would you maybe not want to go against Evelyn more? Sure. You know, has Evelyn won more championships? Has Susie, you know, been tougher, have a better elimination record? Sure. But Coral was the face of the show, was the face of MTV reality for quite some time. A lot of people knock her down because she wasn't always the best competitor. She didn't have to prove herself as much. Back in the day, it was very easy for these veterans to go and kind of run the game. And because you were either scared to go against them or they were controlling who was going in, you just kind of put in the rookies, and there was a little bit of a political dynamic there that when you look at some of the elimination records on some of these earlier players, a Mark or a Coral or a Mike, etc., they're really low, not even in percentages. They're like they won 2 out of 2 eliminations. And you look at it, you're like, wow, you went into 2 eliminations in 6 seasons? That's insane. So you do have a lot of people almost kind of waving their flag, please don't vote for Coral. She once quit, you know, don't vote for Coral. She skated, don't go vote for Coral. She's from this other era. And so, you know, to me, she's the most polarizing member of this ballot. Tanya, I think, would be equally so. And I don't think, when you mentioned the competitor thing, I 100% agree. Tanya, Beth, Katie, I think of these people, they're synonymous with the challenge for me. And a couple ballots down the road, I'd love to put them on there. You mentioned the Evan season with Coral. When you look at that Wikipedia or the Challenge Wiki, which is where you look at the stats, you see the wins, you see the eliminations. You don't see like that Rivals season with her or the Fresh Meat season with her and Evan, where they would have won probably if it wasn't for an injury. There's no way to kind of asterisk that. So that doesn't show up as a win. It doesn't show up as anything. But I think if you watch that and you remember that even late in the game for Coral, she was still a dominant player. So that's the separation for me, where it's when you take the faces of the show from that era, Rachel, Coral, Tanya, Beth, Julie, what separates me for Coral and Rachel is that they also got it done on the field. Tanya didn't. Tanya will probably show up on a ballot down the road. She was a fan favorite, whether you liked watching her or rooting for her, or you were just enamored by the wild card that she was. I could totally see her showing up on a ballot. With this one, there's not a lot of fat. And when I say fat, I mean there's not a lot of like, why'd you put them in? Like, these are 10 people where you just look at the name and you're like, I get it. Tanya is more of like a nuanced conversation. And Tanya comes with those 4 or 5 other people I mentioned who are also nuanced conversations. A Katie, a perfect example. So yeah, I think this one is an easy 10 to come up with.
There is a case for Katie being on this ballot solely for smoking during one of the eliminations.
Hey, don't get me started on smoking, because only recently have they started like coming down on that on the challenge. But the challenge has always been like one of the weird, and road rules, real world, etc. But the challenge in particular has been like this like unofficial sort of endorsement of cigarette smoking, and like you could still actually be a pretty good athlete and smoke, because you have these scenes of people on the balcony, I hate so and so, and then they're winning a final, and it's like you probably have people on the couch saying, hey, people keep telling me to smoke, I guess it's not that bad for me. And only recently has TJ started throwing in like, hey Maddie, maybe you should quit smoking. So and Marie, cigarettes and sadness. So I am a former smoker, and I quit 5 years ago, but it's one of those things where I like that they've been kind of clamping down on it, because these people will go out there and they will do what they do, and thus cigarette smoking does get shown on the show. But I like that now in 2019 we're not just letting it fly.
See, I would go the other way on that. As someone who's trying to quit but still smoking, it's a part of what people do when they start drinking and yelling at each other. You start pounding a few drinks. You're gonna go out on the balcony and you're gonna have some cigarettes. I like that. This is still a reality show. This is what these people are doing, and I like that TJ calls them out, being like, "Hey, if you weren't smoking so much, maybe you could run." But if it's happening, it's happening.
Yeah, it's more like a subconscious thing where, in scripted television, there are actually standards, especially on like the network shows, where you can only show so much smoking, or you can only show it in like a certain way, or if not even at all. A lot of magazines have regulations for what you can advertise and what types of magazines. And, the challenge has a very wide demographic. Of course, we have people who listen to our podcast and watch that show that are adults making decisions for themselves and whatnot. But you do still have impressionable people watching the show. And a lot of people idolize these folks. And, I always used to hate when people would say, oh, you're smoking to look cool or whatever. No, I'm smoking because I have a weird habit and addiction that I can't kind of rein in. But regardless, subconsciously having cool, attractive people on TV smoking and then doing badass stuff is a little bit dangerous, because no one's ever going to be able to quantify it. But you are seeing impressionable people are seeing that. And that's not to say that people can't go and smoke and win a final, because clearly they do that. It's just kind of the wrong message to send, I think. And again, this is coming from somebody who smoked for 10 years. So I'm not trying to be a hypocrite here or anything like that.
Well, but it goes hand in hand too. Like, people are drinking there's a lot of bad behavior on this show. I don't think that smoking is necessarily like the worst thing that's happening here.
Yeah, well, I still drink and I don't smoke anymore, so you can take that for what it's worth.
All right, so your vote would be for Coral for this? That's who you're leaning at least towards?
So I mean, look, there's two ways to look at it, because the way we're doing it, and we can a lot of people have said, hey, why don't you let us pick two? This first one out, we're letting everyone pick one, and then it'll be the top two vote getters that get in. So there's two ways to look at it. There's kind of who I hope are the two, and then of course I only get to vote for one, so who am I using my vote on? I hope that, and I will say this, we've already had a week of voting. I know a lot of people have already voted. We have another week to go. I'm not trying to voting tamper here. And our listeners are, trust me, they will vote for who they want to vote for regardless. But I do kind of, not even secretly, openly hope that we have Mike, Mark, Coral, and Rachel as our first four here. Albeit you can only vote for one each. So, I mean, to be honest with you, I think Rachel maybe has the resume that would still stack up as we go further. And if you're competing against a Cara Maria, you're competing against an Emily, it's like, I do think Rachel's looked at as a little bit more physically imposing, so she probably has the better chance to get it in a later date than Coral. I think the further removed we get from Coral, and the more she's going up with the Sarah Rice, she's going up against some of these added candidates who will add to the ballot, it might be harder. So that's why I'll probably use my vote on Coral. Mike and Mark is a tough one. I'm probably going to vote for Mark, but that one is razor thin for me, and it's kind of one of those things where I won't have the luxury of doing so, but I almost want to see who needs my vote more. I see a lot of traction that Mark's getting out there on the social media. Mark's out there shaking hands and kissing babies. If you have commented on one of these Hall of Fame posts and said I vote for Mark Long, or even if you don't have an official vote, said this has to be Mark Long, he has liked that comment. He has said thank you. So he's out there campaigning. Like obviously the Miz does not have time to do because he's on Raw every week, and SmackDown. So it's tough there, but I kind of hope those are the four, because I'll say this. I do get that Landon, I mean, one of the best to ever do it, got a crazy resume. I mean, the guy probably would still be winning today if he was out there. I get it. Evelyn one of the best to ever do it. But there's no way to go back in time and do a ChallengeMania live or a ChallengeMania ballot before those two would be on it. But if there was, you'd probably have your Marks and your Mikes and your Corals and your Rachels getting in. Of course, now we're doing one that has these guys on it. I think maybe they're their next year's ballot for me. But I see a lot of traction for them, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have a Landon or a an Evelyn in there. Maybe it's 1-1. Maybe it's one older veteran and someone from that next generation, whether it's an Alton or a Landon. And Abe is sort of the best of both worlds because he's actually, out of everyone on the male ballot, has played the most recently, whereas he also started playing way before, I guess probably around when Alton played. And Landon played as well. So he's kind of the best of both worlds there. And he gets a lot of love too, a fan favorite in Abrams. So yeah, who would forget who you would vote for. When you look at that, there's going to be 2 guys and 2 girls going in here. Who do you kind of hope it is?
I would hope it's Evelyn and Coral. I think you get the best of both worlds that way. I know Rachel's a great competitor and she will get in. I just think that Evelyn is a better competitor. She's probably one of the 3 best female challengers of all time in terms of pure competition. And I really enjoyed her character too. And Coral is almost a pure character play. And she has the longevity. She was the fixture, like you mentioned, of even just MTV at the time. So I think putting those 2 in, Susie and Paula might have their time coming, but it's between those 3, and I would go Evelyn over Rachel. So I put in Coral in them. On the guys' side, I think it's completely wide open because going back and watching some of the older seasons, sneaky thing about The Miz is competition-wise, he's only really good on Inferno 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike, it's one of those things where he's got the best sort of ancillary, can't put it down on paper, but the fact that his post-challenge career has in essence elevated the challenge and reality TV and the real world and that whole platform with his success there, that's something that doesn't go on paper. So you're right. I mean, it's one of those things where it's sort of a revisionist history about how good he was on the show itself, but he's got that check mark that not a lot of other people ever that will put on this ballot will ever have. I mean, so it's one of those things where if he doesn't get in now, does he get in again later on? Probably. But yeah, out of the 2 of them, I think Mark Long was always a little bit more feared than a Mike. So I'm with you there.
So I think it comes down to me between it almost breaking up the same way. Who's the best sort of personality, character, and longevity that I remember from being like a face of the challenge versus actual overall competitor. So for me, I think I put Mark's a good competitor. He's probably better than The Miz was, but I associate them with the challenge when I think about it, when I think about the old challenges. And Alton's kind of the same way, but he was the first really, really good competitor. Abe, I love, but I think I would go with Landon just because I think he might be the best male cast member, at least in terms of competition. He's almost like the male version of Evelyn, but really nice.
The one thing that Landon has that I can't really think of anyone else on the male ballot that has it is he's got a signature win. Because again, these types of formats started happening later. So Paula has a couple dual wins with the Rivals wins. Evelyn's got it. But the majority of the other cast members on here played mainly in those team win seasons. Landon's win on Fresh Meat 2 is a really signature win.
With Carly, too. Everyone always complains about getting the bad partner. And you always see, even in teams that win, I remember, Battle of the Seasons, the second one, when it was, Zach and Frank with Ashley, and I forget who the other one was, Sam. And they were just, berating her the entire time. That was their motivation. Landon went the exact opposite way. He was just nice the entire time. He was super positive the entire time. And I felt like that just went a long way to establishing him as a good guy character. And realistically, he probably would have won the duel too if he hadn't had a brain fart in that final one before going to the final elimination against Brad.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you do the blindfolded resume thing that they like to do on ESPN sometimes, where they're proving look how underrated Lance Berkman is. He's got the best resume on paper by far. I'm totally cool with Landon getting in. What's cool about this ballot is that I'm cool with any of these people getting in. As I mentioned, what I love if we could knock all these OGs off the ballot in year one, because I do think a Landon and Alton, they will be on these for years to come and get in probably. Yes. That being said, if it splits down the middle, like you said, and we get, say, a Mark or a Miz and a Landon as the guys, and we get, say, an Evelyn, I think would probably be the younger woman to get in, and then you get a Coral or a Rachel and Evelyn. I'm okay with that too. Albeit, I'm also cool if it ends up being, Susie and Paula and Abram and Alton. We don't want anyone on this first ballot. You don't, when you have 33 seasons of a show and you're doing an initial ballot, there's no reason you should have someone on it for ceremony's sake. So all these people have great cases. All these people have our patrons out there that are fighting on their behalf and trying to you see people literally posting the stat resumes on Twitter and stuff like that to try to get the ball rolling for some of these folks. So I'm sorry I don't have an update on the voting, but there's one more week. It'll close on Friday next week. Been up for 2 weeks at that point. So we're up for a week now, and then we have another week if you do want to become a Maniac level patron. And that also gets you all the bonus content and stuff like that too, a lot of giveaways and whatnot. So, but yeah, it's a fun conversation. I mean, these are the conversations we like to have on a weekly basis, on a season by season basis. And it's fun to still have these conversations about that generation because, Lord knows we all want some of these guys back on our TV screens. That might not happen. The more and more they keep just infusing these new cast members from the UK and from other reality shows, it's hard to believe that they're going to dig up a Mark Long, or we know the Miz will probably never be on again. I know, having from talked to both of them, we're probably not going to get a Landon or a Alton back on the show because of just the circumstances of their lives to this day. So, Paula as well with the kids. So it's fun to be talking about these people, even in this regard, even in this kind of, theoretical Hall of Fame and comparing their primes with each other. Because I think that's what unites us all as far as being challenge maniacs is we care about that. Like there's people who tune into reality TV every week. It's just kind of their guilty pleasure show, or they watch, or they like the drama. The people who listen to our podcast, the people who are patrons of our podcast, the people who tune into your show when you talk about the challenge, they love comparing and contrasting generations, stats, and all that stuff. And that's what's great about it. So that's what's cool about this venture.
Well, if we do that, compare and contrast the different types of seasons, maybe it's nostalgia talking, but I really enjoyed War of the Worlds. I really enjoyed Dirty 30. I didn't enjoy the two that were in between. There was nothing for me to really connect with there. But when we get back to even from, let's say, like Inferno 1 through, Fresh Meat 2 or Duel 2, something like that, you had a pretty standard rotation of the same people coming back over and over again with different types of formats. I kind of miss the old team formats. And I know some of the rules were kind of wonky. People would throw challenges and you had to figure out a way to get around that. But we've really gotten away from stuff that goes on in the house versus what happens now. Like everyone is so cutthroat now in the house, always just trying to scheme and do whatever. At least back in the day, now I'm the old man here talking, but like when everyone was on a team, it didn't seem quite as dire, and there's more money on the line now, and maybe that has a lot to do with it, but it seemed more fun to be in the house, 6 years ago, and that did translate through the screen to me.
So I'll say it's twofold. So I'm all for starting a season out with a team format. I'm a big Survivor fan. And for those who don't watch Survivor or aren't aware of the format, every season starts out with 2 tribes. So they're essentially teams, and there's a little bit of a dynamic within those tribes. They then will sometimes reshuffle and make 2 different tribes, or they'll go to 3 tribes. But eventually, when you get down to about 12, it's a solo game. And you're competing for votes instead of trying to compete to get to a final. But my point is that it becomes kind of 2 shows. I'd love to see a season start off as a team show. But when it gets down to the end, I don't want to see, say, 6 people win because they were on the same team and they beat this 6 people. I like that now we're in an era where there's, first place, second place, third place, or maybe a team of 2, 1, or this or that. Because again, when comparing these generations, the big problem is that when you look at it, it's hard to distinguish someone who won a championship on a team of 6 from a championship that they won just with Carly, and I'd like there to be a little bit of uniformity there. I also think the drama is a little better. And so I do think a team format would be great for house dynamic and politics for sure. And I'd love to see that, just not for a whole season. As far as it feeling more fun back then, I do think that a lot of the fun, it's funny, there's some tough rewatches. And sometimes you'll get people who dig up old clips and kind of judge them by 2019 standards. We were just a different, I want to say country, but world back then. I know you're in Canada. So we were just a different world back then when it came to what, the party culture and, kind of watching people just hang out and have fun and stuff like that. And these people were having a good time and they were being wacky and wild. And depending on who you asked, maybe some people went too far with some stuff or some people didn't. And we're all kind of just sitting back with our popcorn, eating it and whatnot. But today's a little different. And now it's like when you even hear about some of the stuff that happens where in the moment it was people hanging out and having fun, we don't sit there with our popcorn anymore. We sit there with our keyboards. We're like, oh my God, did you hear what happened? Or I can't believe that happened, because this is stuff that if it happened in the real world or happened to your friend, you shouldn't stand for it. But these are a bunch of people, as you mentioned, drinking and smoking cigarettes at 12:30 at night in a foreign country, and that's what happens. So I think that a lot of that stuff still is happening, but it's probably ending up on the cutting room floor just based on the different, dynamic we have as a society these days.
So the one thing I did reach out to you about, and we're not going to do it right now, but I want to get your initial thoughts on it because I'd really love to get 4 people together. Let's say we have a a theoretical format where there's 4, like cutthroat style, but instead of 3 teams, there's 4 teams, 5 guys, 5 girls on a team, and we do a draft, snake draft format. And you get the first pick of any challenger of all time in the season that you want them from. But once that person is selected, they are no longer eligible for this list. If you had the first pick, who do you think you would take?
So just to clarify, so am I taking them retroactively with the sort of level of clout and success they had on that season? Like, could I, for instance, say I want season 33 version of Wes, who I think played a masterful game, but I don't want him on season 34 because I think his game was so masterful and he walked us through it to such a detailed degree that you'd be an idiot to either work with him or not see him coming from a mile away going forward?
I would think that you would paste any sort of strategy or politicking onto the person from whenever, because a lot of that, I mean, he did do a masterful stroke on season 33, but Wes always tries to play this sort of game. I would think almost like peak performance. Like if you wanted to take dual 1 CT, like that guy was an absolute monster and screwed himself from going to the final.
But that's the problem, is that he's a wild card, and especially if we're playing today, I think that like CT, by today's standards, he probably got away with so many things that he didn't get kicked off for at the time that today he would get kicked off for, or that, the internet would take him to. It's one of those things where CT has this great character arc that we got to see because he started in this generation where, yeah, sure, he did get kicked off a show or two for violence, but we were forgiving back then. We gave people second chances. We don't do that today. If he was doing that stuff today, we might never get that amazing arc with him and Diem and him coming back and being this kind of fatherly figure now and having this funny commentary and the dad bod stuff. And we would never get those eras of CT, because if you do the stuff that he did back then today, to use an example, Corey and Tony get into that fight last year, and we'll see if Corey gets a redemption arc on the challenge. But it's just not as acceptable today as it was back then.
So I think that goes along with the risk that you want to take as a part of your draft. It'd be like drafting Gronk in the first round 2 years ago. Hey, he might play, right, but at the same time, he might not play. So that's the risk that you have to be willing to take. I think that if you're going to have the first pick overall, that you might try to go with almost the shallowest talent pool and try to take the best competitor possible. So I kind of had it broken down into 3 people that I would probably take number 1 overall. And it was between Evelyn, Rachel, and Laurel, and Emily Schramm, I guess, would be in contention for my first overall pick. And I think for guys, the answer is just Landon.
Yeah, no, I mean, Landon, it's funny because it's one of those things where the people, and Landon's a great example of this, Derek's a great example of this, Darrell's a great example of this. It's so funny that Landon has taken himself out of the game, because Darrell and Derek haven't, and yet we don't see them on every season because they play a great game from a success in the game standpoint. But from a TV standpoint, they're playing too solid of a game politically. Not enough people hate them. They're not getting into a lot of fights. And Landon, I imagine, would probably be somewhere in that realm too. So it's one of those things where it's like, if I was drafting, yes, I would definitely want a Landon or a Darrell or a Derek from that same era you're talking about. But it's one of those things where if you're drafting them and you kind of have to wait and see if they're cast for the season that you want to be on, they might not be cast. They might not be picked because they're not doing enough of the TV groundwork. But Landon, I think, as we talked about with the Hall of Fame, is one of those people who just always seem to get it done, and is scrappy, but also has a little bit of size to him, especially now. Derek, I put in that category. So I'm okay with Landon there. And the other 2 I would go with are Darrell and Derek. But that's more of like a physical standpoint without the sort of social element to it. In today's day and age, having that social game, not even just for success, but for from a television standpoint, getting the TV time that's necessary, being a part of the overall narrative of the show is so important that's why I throw Wes in there, because Wes can cut it when it comes to the competitions. He just made the final and did very well, came in 3rd place, but he has the TV thing down. He has the politics down. And if I could be with him there on the first go around with it and be that partner with him like Hunter was on this season, Hunter essentially rode his coattails to the final. I don't know that there's going to be much riding him to a final going forward after he kind of rubbed an entire country the wrong way with the UK. But all those guys are good. So you go Landon. I guess I would go Wes.
Yeah, it's funny that Bananas doesn't even come up. I think that Bananas might be a liability on this team.
The thing about Bananas is he is, we talk about the Hall of Fame with the Corals of the world, and Bananas is one of those things where he's great TV. He's certainly, I mean, he's in great shape. He's probably in the best physical shape he's ever been in. I'm not saying he's any slouch in that regard, but it's one of those things where it's like when you look at the elimination record, you saw just on Dirty 30, Derek took him out. You saw Devin take him out on Vendettas. He's not as feared to me. I think a lot of his stats and a lot of his championships come from the fact that he's had great partners. He's had great team dynamics and the seasons where those are very necessary. You use the Island as an example, but he's had some great partners, Camilla and whatnot. And then also the fact that he's played every season since 1975. So a Darrell who's like right there, almost like, has those championships too. They don't let him play as much to this day. If you were letting Darrell play every season since Invasion, who knows? Maybe you'd have a couple more. Derek, of course, as well, is another example. Wes, because he took himself out of the game because he's got a very successful business venture in Tulsa and in Kansas City. But, those guys, you wonder. Bananas, it's really the championships that separate him because he's never been a feared guy. He's never been a feared politician. He's almost been, like you said, an albatross. So he's almost kind of one of those guys you pencil in. You would never draft him because he's going to be there anyway. It's one of those things. You use the analogy with Gronk. I mean, there's one of those things where it's like, there's those guys always wind up on your team. Like Matthew Stafford's always going to end up being your backup quarterback or something like that. You don't need to circle him on the thing, and that's sort of how I feel about Johnny Bananas. He's going to be there. No need to draft him. They'll draft him for you.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned someone like Matthew Stafford. You can win a fantasy championship with Matthew Stafford if the rest of your team is really good. And when I say not necessarily drafting for a season, but drafting for just picking an all-time team that you think that this team could go and win the challenges, win the final, and be on their way. If we had just some sort of format, maybe we'll have to figure out the details on that. As it pertains to Bananas, it always just felt like he was a 7 out of 10 at everything, which made him really good at finals versus actual individual competitions. And Darrell was kind of the same way. You never really saw Darrell in a whole bunch of eliminations, but he was so good at everything almost across the board, whether it be, he was in great cardio shape. He could run. He was strong. He was smart. He could solve puzzles. Stuff didn't confuse him. He didn't fly off the rails. He was very focused when it came down to it. I feel like Bananas is the same way, is that you want to get these guys out before the finals because that's actually where they're at their best.
Yeah, I also think people are scared of Darrell in a way they're not scared of Bananas. And that people also – so there's a thing in the UFC. So I'll give you an example. So the UFC hates fighters that are not really marketable, like a John Fitch or a Rory McDonald that they just let go and go to Bellator. Or even a Demetrius Johnson, who's just like an all-world killer. But they're like, you can go to one. We don't really care because what they do is they beat everyone else who is marketable and they don't sell pay-per-view buys. So the thing with Darrell is you're not going to win any points for calling out Darrell and being Darrell. You might win some points with Scott Yager or Pat Mayo or the real insiders, but it's like Johnny Bananas. That's a headline maker. Devin turned a feud with Johnny Bananas into a career, essentially. And that's smart because he can do that for you. Calling out Darrell is not smart because you'll either lose or you'll win, but you'll look bad doing so, or you'll tie him like Nelson did, and you're not going to probably get anything out of having beaten Darrell. That's not something that's going to be a career definer. So Johnny Bananas has two things working against him. He's probably not as good as Darrell in those eliminations, and also if you do call your shot and take out Bananas, that's probably going to be like a banner episode for the season. Wes did it. He wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, but Wes was the one who kind of orchestrated Bananas going out. And then Bananas ends up going down to Zach earlier this season. And that was a highlight towards the first, few episodes of this season because he's such a big name. Whether he's going out early, whether he's going out late, who's taking him out, that's a headline maker. I couldn't tell you the person who eliminated Darrell from if you name the season. It doesn't stand out to me. I can almost always tell you what the end of Bananas was on every year.
I say the only time I ever really remember Darrell going out is when he punched Brad in the face and got sent home on the ruins.
That's a thing that happened. Yeah,
that's about it. So I was rewatching the Inferno 2 recently too. My friend Rob, they do recaps of all the old seasons, the Challenge Chronicles, if people want to check that out. But there was Derek and Landon were wrestling on a roof on Inferno 2. Someone almost felt Landon got blackout drunk. That's when they ended up shaving his head in the middle of the night. Then he got that haircut for the rest of the season.
That's happened to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like there used to be more in-house, more physical joking around that you just can't get away with today. And I mean, the Darrell thing maybe just been the culmination of all that, where him and Brad were fucking around, and they took it a bit too far because they got a bit too drunk. But it seemed like there used to be friendly wrestling going on, just people blowing off steam at some points.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the social media thing where a lot of these people, and don't get me wrong, to this day, like I'm on board with the conspiracy theorists who are like, I think Kyle and Paulie actually like each other. I think a lot of it is played up for TV, but the difference here is this. Back in those generations, these people went home to their regular lives. They might have each other's cell phone numbers. They might see each other out at a bar appearance or something. But for the most part, they didn't have like the other 312 days a year to start arguments with each other publicly on social media. Now, not only do they have that, they're pressured to do that. So there's this weird pride element to it where it's like if you're two people who don't like each other on the show or get into a fight on the show, you have to kind of back that up in front of the ongoing audience on social media. And I think that kind of, it makes everybody a little touchier, and it makes everybody, it's not as fun. The physicality isn't as fun. It's not a bunch of people goofing off because these people it's not even whether they genuinely like each other or not, but they can relate to each other more than they can relate to anyone else. These people have such a singular experience in life where 2 times a year they get flown out to Africa or Australia or Thailand or wherever, and they get to compete in these wacky, wild competitions. They get hung upside down from cranes. They get to battle each other out in these American Gladiator type things. And then they go back to their regular lives. That's something that literally only happens to about 60 people in the entire world. So even if you're 2 people who argue on the show or you wrestle on top of a roof or whatever, you probably relate to that person and you get them more than you do your neighbor or your friend at your gym or your best friend from college or whoever. So I do think back in the day, there was more of a summer camp vibe to it. They all come back and this and that. And it's like, oh, it's you again. Okay, cool. Let's have some fun. Okay, even if we get into an argument, okay, I get it. We're all friends. Now there's this weird thing where they're all putting on a show 365 days a year. They're putting on a show on our podcast. They're putting on a show on every other podcast they go on. They're putting on a show on social media, on Instagram, in Us Weekly, on People, whatever. And so it's a little weirder. There's baggage to it. People do get offended by that stuff. I know a lot of people think it's pretend, but people don't like the stuff that people say on social media, the rumors they start, and when real life is happening to these people, and you're getting, people, when someone has a following of 120,000 Twitter followers and they go and comment on something, you're bringing 120,000 people with you. And some of them are agreeing with you, or some of them are piling on the slander or whatever. And then people get into that house and they're like, wow, I don't like this person as much as I would have if we went back to our separate lives and then came back and now we're in Uganda wrestling in the sand again. So I think social media is fun for all of us to kind of pay attention to throughout the year, but I do think it's contributed a little bit negatively to the camaraderie, the understated camaraderie that made those old seasons pretty fun.
Scott Yager, follow him on Twitter at Shot of Yager. Tell everyone about ChallengeMania Live tomorrow night in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so tomorrow night, 5 p.m. show, Hollywood Improv. Tickets at challengemania.la. You can also get VIP tickets, which will get you into the meet and greet before. You can come hang out, take pictures with all of the following: Davon Rogers, the Nolan twins, Liz and Julia, Alton Williams, who we talked about, maybe a future Hall of Famer, Veronica Portillo, definitely a future Hall of Famer once she's eligible. I'll be there. Derek will be there. Sean Merriman of the San Diego Chargers, former All-Pro linebacker, will be there because remember, he did appear on Champs vs. Pros. We'll have some surprises for you there as well. It's at the Hollywood Improv on Melrose, challengemania.la for tickets. And as we said, you can still sign up to be a Maniac level patron. If you do want to officially vote, I know you can have fun here with Pat as well. You can officially vote at patreon.com/ChallengeMania for the Hall of Fame. You get to vote for one guy and one girl each. And the top 2 vote getters will get in. They'll join Dean Brown as part of our inaugural Hall of Fame class. Hopefully we'll be doing this every summer. If you're a patron, you also get to vote for our Challenge Mania awards in the winter as well. Follow me on Twitter at Shot of Yager, at Scott of Yager on Instagram. Could not get at Shot of Yager there. For some reason, the guy's inactive and they won't get rid of his account. It's YAGER. And also Facebook.com/ChallengeMania podcast is a good place to find us over there. Just search Challenge Mania everywhere you get your podcast. If you like the challenge, you like our show, I guarantee it. Thank you for having me, Pat. And thanks to DraftKings, who I should have mentioned when you had me on the first time, but a great partner of our show as well. We love DraftKings. We do a lot of fun contests with them. We'll re-up some of that in the football season too. So love DraftKings.
Well, you're over on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, wherever it might be, finding Challenge Mania. Give a subscribe and a review and a rating to the Pat Mayo Experience over there, too. And that's all I'll say. If you smash the like button to this video, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section and give me your 2 males and 2 females that you would nominate for the Hall of Fame. They could not have appeared on a season since, I guess, whatever the one was before Rivals 3. So that's the cutoff for it. And if you do want to vote, like Scott said, become a patron over at Challenge Mania. Become a Maniac. And then you'll get your vote for the official Challenge Mania Challenge Hall of Fame. I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience! Experience!